Welcome to our workshop, Applying from MA Programs in Anthropology. We'll be covering the following topics.
I'm Nicole Peterson. I'm one of the faculty here in Anthropology, and I'm also the graduate director of our master's program. So if you're applying, there's a couple things to do. So you see apply is actually the end of this arrow, which has some advantages, but it means that right now, talk with faculty, start today. And this is about what your interests are. What do you want to do? What do you want to get out of life? What are your goals? And having those kind of conversations with faculty means that they can help advise you on where you might start looking, what programs. We know colleagues all over the country, all over the world. Maybe we know someone who's doing exactly what you want to do. That's a great connection, and you really enjoy this. So that's talking with faculty. Most programs require the GRE. We are actually switching to not require the GRE, and for early entry it's not required anyway. But you may need to take the GRE, so that's something to schedule relatively early so you can retake it if it's low. I encourage you to kind of look at a book. I have a GRE book. I have to tell you, the logic section is hard. It's counterintuitive to some extent. So look at a book, at a GRE book at least before you do it. Put this in your schedule, right? When are you going to take the GRE if the programs you're interested in require it?
I would also say, sorry about the GRE, most programs, unlike undergrad, most master's programs and PhD programs don't list on their website what their average GRE score is, because that is one of the kind of lower criteria, but that doesn't mean it doesn't matter. So I went into applying to grad schools with the idea it didn't matter, and didn't get into Tulane because of that. Because it turned out they did have a cutoff, and I was below it. Yeah. I hadn't done my research on that end, so take it seriously. Don't stress out if it's not the best grade you've ever gotten.
So part of this, as I said, some require the GRE, some don't. Find out about the program. So this is Google. You guys are all familiar with Google. You can use Google. Find a program around, usually the US, but abroad as well. You can look and see who's doing what you're interested in. Do they require the GRE? Talk to their faculty. Right? So some of this is iterative. You kind of go back and forth along here. But this is, I encourage you to start early in identifying where you could go, because that determines your GRE score. It may shape what you want to do. You run into someone doing something amazing you never knew existed, and you're thinking, why did I want to do this other thing? So you actually could expand your horizons in ways you don't expect. So that kind of identifying a program is a process of searching. And then the application, this is our portal. Most application processes are online now. And it should be straightforward from the department how to get there. But if it's not, Google it. Not all universities have very straightforward things. That's going to be a process of gathering information, sending your test scores, and then applying. And I will say, so just on the early submission, go back a little bit, we've had students that have gotten hung up in our system, our online system, because they're missing something, and it's kind of annoying. So the earlier you get your applications in, the more that can get resolved before any funding deadlines. So the different pieces of the application are fairly straightforward, but I just want to go through them a little bit. The faculty are really useful in getting letters of recommendation. In fact, all of your letters of recommendation should come from faculty members. And you should ask them early about writing letters. But even before that, remember that timeline was talk to faculty first? They can only write what they know. You have to talk to them, make an impression on them. I've had students who've asked me to write a letter, and they've been in a class, I don't remember who they are, and I have to look at their grade to see how well they did. And that makes it hard to write a really good letter. Students who I've talked to, who I've had interactions with, especially those who work with me on research projects, I can write pages and pages, well, a couple pages of good stuff that's much more detailed about why they would be a good candidate for a master's program. I usually ask students, if they ask me to write a letter, I say send me your resume and your statement of purpose. Because then I can combine what I know about you with what you want to do next. And it helps me write a better letter. So you have to put the effort in reaching out, letting the faculty member know you're interested in grad school, and making a good impression. Not just through your coursework, but through interactions. Ask early. We get a lot of requests, so it's good to give them a couple weeks to write a letter. Any less than 2 weeks, I think, is unreasonable.
Also ask often.
And often, if they don't respond, it's not because they don't want to write it, they've just gotten bogged down. So always feel like you can do a follow-up email and just say, hey, so I sent you something. I don't know if you saw it. And then they can say no if they don't want to, but it usually is they've just lost track of it. And then the last thing, when you get into your dream program, let us know. It's always good to kind of know what our students are doing. It's best to ask someone who's an assistant or an associate professor or a full professor if you know the difference there. just because they tend to have contacts at other universities as well that might be useful.
And also I would say, if there's somebody in the department who does exactly what you want to do and you don't know them as well, ask them for a letter, but also make sure you get a letter from somebody who knows you really, really well, even if they don't do exactly what you want to do. So that when you apply somewhere, they're like, oh, they're coming from UNC Charlotte. I know Nicole Peterson is there and she's the premier environmental anthropologist these days. Why don't they have a letter from her if they want to do environmental anthropology? All right. So your statement of purpose is kind of this weird document that no one is ever really clear on exactly how to write. But basically, it's your chance to tell the people you're applying with what you're interested in, why you're interested in it, how you got there. If you want to start off with a snappy anecdote about your childhood, you can, but it is by no means required. And sometimes detracts from your overall point. So think about that. Yeah. But think about what research you'd like to do, right? This is kind of your chance to dream a little bit, prove that you understand what research means, right? That you know kind of whatever you're applying to, what those people do, right? You want to demonstrate some knowledge, but also kind of what maybe new perspective, if you have an idea of what you'd like to study, you can propose it right then and there. If you're really interested in trauma in South America, and you're like, and I know Dr. Youngs does that, right? You should talk about trauma in South America in your letter. Having said that, the big difference between a statement of purpose for a master's program and a PhD program is that you don't need to be as specific for a master's program. So prove that you understand what research is, you know how to do research, you understand what a reasonable project would be, but you're not, outlining your whole dissertation in this letter because it's going to be more basic than that. I'll call out which faculty you're interested in working with. That makes it really easy if you haven't done a good job being explicit about which subfield you're interested in. If you name faculty, we can be like, all right, those 3 people, are they interested in working on the topics you have suggested? I generally think naming in a department, we have 9 tenure track folks in our department. People naming 3 seems about right to me. If you're like, I have no idea and I don't want to put a 3rd name in because that's like crap, then don't just name somebody to name somebody. But you probably should be able to find 3 people who have similar interests to you. It's also a good rule of thumb because you're going to have 3 people on your committee pretty much anywhere you go. So you've already kind of set yourself up. You've put it in their mind. They can envision you in this program with a committee, right? And that's what you want. The other thing in your statement of purpose that you should address is why are you doing this? Like, not only that you're interested in research and you want to do these particular things, but why are you getting this master's degree? And why are you getting a master's degree? And why that one in particular? So why that school? And that might be where you name the faculty, or if they have a lab facility you're really interested in, or they're closely connected to a museum, right? Those would all be things you want to point out, that you've done your research on the school. Often people talk about their goal after their master's. Are they thinking they want to go on to a PhD program? Are they interested in staying in Charlotte and working for an NGO or something else here in Charlotte? And those would be things that we'll think about when we're accepting students in terms of, is this somebody I can mentor? Can I help them get to their ultimate goal? Finally, I guess the statement of purpose is also your place to justify if you have any low GRE scores or low GPA. We've had candidates who apply, it's like, listen, I started off as a chem major, spent 2 years of my life doing that, and it was a horrible mistake. And then I found anthropology, and now I love it, and that's what I want to do. But you'll see that I got D's for my first 2 years of college, right? And so having a low GPA or having low GRE scores, or if English isn't your first language or something like that, right? Those things won't prevent you from getting into grad school, but you probably do need to address them in your letter. And most anthropologists, other programs might not be as sympathetic, but I'd say most anthropologists are pretty sympathetic to a lot of those low grades in the maths and sciences.
I guess I would say it's professional. It's a professional communication. So we get some that are very creative, and we appreciate that, but they don't help us understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. So it really should be focused and professional that way.
Have someone else read it, preferably a faculty member. Don't have your best friend read it, because they're going to be like, you're lovely, you're great, and you want that person to read it too. But
now that you've cultivated these faculty relationships, use them. Yeah, right? Hey, so you talked to us about, come Dr. Yunks, you talked to us about MA programs. Here's my essay. Could you read it? Give me feedback in a couple weeks.
I'm a proponent of no longer than 2 pages. We accepted students who wrote 4 pages. So there's no rule. Double-spaced, yeah.
Contact and funding. You should contact people at these schools if you're interested in working with them, but you don't have to. Most students we've never heard from before they send their application in, and that's fine. But if you have something particularly you want to work on, and I think Sarah had a couple students talk with her ahead of time, and I think that has an impact positively if you're asking good questions and not just, hey, so tell me about your program. Well, we have a website, right? Here's our website. Come back when you have something else. But you've had some contact with students coming in here.
Yeah, I've had students email me and just say, I'm an undergrad at ECU and I've worked with this person and I'm interested in these topics. It's always kind of weird because you want to ask a question, but sometimes you're like, what do I ask, right? So asking if they're taking students is always a good idea. They might be on leave in the fall, so they're not accepting any students. They might have too many students already, so they're not taking any students. And also asking, even if you can't really make it work, asking if there's an opportunity to visit, right? This is also someplace, if you're not coming here, someplace that you're going to live for 2 years. It's a good idea to visit before you commit to anywhere. And it gives you a chance to kind of talk to that faculty member in person. It's more common for PhD programs, but it's at least a question you could ask if you felt like you needed an additional question.
And you could ask if they're doing any new research, if they have new projects coming up, and that might help you understand what you might be working on as a master's student. You may have questions. I'm trying to think of other good questions. Funding's the next point. Yeah. So one of the great things about master's programs is that sometimes you can get funding, and sometimes you're a teaching assistant or a research assistant, or sometimes you have a fellowship. But you want to get in on that because it's that they pay you to go to school. So you often get tuition plus stipend, which is nice. So you're being paid to go to school, which is great. But it's also not all that common, especially for master's programs. So you want to find out early when those deadlines are and if you need a separate application.
The other thing I think that I should have mentioned when Nicole referenced me before is it gets faculty excited, right? So like as applications came in, I knew I had emails from 3 or 4 students, so I could be like, ooh, has so-and-so submitted yet? Like, because I'd emailed with them and I was like excited that they were excited to come here. And you want that. You want people who are accepting you to be like excited about it.
So the next slide has a lot of text on it. Don't panic. It's a good table I saw in a psychology journal it's called Kisses of Death for the graduate school application. So these are things to avoid doing, but I just want to show you so many ways that you can go wrong.
And finally, here are the deadlines for the UNC Charlotte's Master's in Anthropology program.